Where were you born? When were you born?
I was born January 27th, 1942 in San Francisco.
And who were your parents?
My mother was was a school teacher all my life. At the time, she was just in school, and my dad was in the Merchant Marine and left our family when I was pretty young. And curiously enough, when my son was 5 months old, they remarried after 22 years. So he's around. So they were both Oregonians. Their parents had gone to Oregon and worked in different, occupations. My mother's father was a lumberman and a stagecoach driver, and my dad's mom was a school teacher in Nebraska who married for companionship. It was one of those typical Western American families. And I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area as a small child, and then moved up to Oregon, and then went to Michigan after my parents divorced, and grew up in Michigan until I was about 11. Little Midwest in there. And then came back to San Francisco area. Lived in Berkeley till I got out of high school and moved to San Francisco. It sort of was in 10-year increments. I was in San Francisco from about 1962 to 1971. And then moved up to Sonoma County, which is a rural area north of San Francisco, from about 71 until 79. And then I had to move back to the Bay Area for a while, and now here I'm in West Marin since about 1982.
And brothers and sisters?
I have one full brother who's just 18 months younger than I, and then half sister, and two half brothers who are about 10 years younger.
And influential others? I'm thinking of the song Eyes of a Painter.
Oh, okay.
He sounds like an influential person to me.
He was I only met him briefly, but I had a relationship with his son for almost 10 years. And we went down to Oklahoma together at a Thanksgiving time, and I met him. And we just really, he struck a chord. I just thought he was an incredible human being. He was quite elderly and quite ill, and I remember I said to him, he was in the kitchen. He had run the grocery store in town, this little bitty town, for years, and fed everybody during the Depression and stuff. And here he was at the end of his life with lung cancer, and I remember saying to him, "I'm going to go out for a ride, Les. What do I look for?" And he just fixed me with these steely eyes and said, "Look for, you don't look for nothing. You watch the light." And I just thought, here's this man. He dropped out of school in the 8th grade and had a hard life, and had a lot of love in him, and he just had the eyes of a painter, heart of a maker of songs. And so I wrote that song for him when I got home. Mm-hmm. I had another older woman who was a big influence in my life when my kids were small, who's more like my mother than my mother. She's in her 90s now. She just really influenced me in lots of ways.
And who was that?
Her name was Isabel Bockles, and she grew up in Nebraska and decided she wasn't going to get married like all her other girlfriends were, and so she went off to teacher's college, which was at the turn of the century, and then took her girlfriend and went all over the West on a train, came back and worked as a nurse, and met this miner in Colorado who was there because he had measles. Knew if he asked her to marry him, she'd say yes, so she went back to New York and worked in the settlement houses for 12 years. He came back to New York, and he asked her, and she said yes, and they ended up in a gold mine town in Sierra County, which is sort of my spiritual home here in California. And she was the only woman up there in the mining camps, and they had their one and only child when he was 54 and she was 47 or something like that. It was an amazing woman, just amazing woman, and she taught me a lot about staying alive and staying creative in your life, working with resources. I learned to can, very practical things from her, but she also had this mind and this spirit that just hasn't even quit.
How did you meet this person?
I met her son, actually, when I lived in Berkeley, when I was just out of high school. He moved in next door to me, In those days, it was just the post-beatnik era, right in there, and he was padding around in a Japanese kimono and playing the guitar, and I didn't know anything about the guitar, and he taught me the Wildwood Flower. That was a big song I learned, which I later named my band after. Mm-hmm. And he was a family friend for several years, and then he became quite ill, and is now institutionalized. But in that time, he really opened up a world to me. Meeting his family and getting up there in the mountains and seeing these people who, her husband was the son of German immigrants. He used to walk to school through the mountains, through the Chinese gold camps. It was very recent history, mm-hmm. And it feeds a part of me. I love being close to nature and in the mountains, and that kind of. I like those sturdy people who are just creative and resourceful and clear. So it's wonderful to have that kind of association.
So you went to school in Berkeley?
I went to Berkeley. Let's see, I went to school from about 5th grade through high school, first year of college, right here in the Bay Area, and then moved to San Francisco and went to about a year and a half of college, and then got married to an architect. I was married to an architect for over 7 years, and we had 2 children, and I wasn't there
music. Name?
Saul Wolf. That's where I picked up the wolf. A good name is worth keeping. And my kids are now 21 and 18. We have a really good relationship. We've always we had joint custody of the kids. In those days, it was unusual, for a lot of the arrangements that we did. And I moved up to the country in Sonoma County. He stayed in the city, and the kids went back and forth. And they're both into music, and they're both into being alive. They're just good people. He's an architect still. I had grown up as a kid, playing music on the piano. I always wanted to sing, but my mother would never give me voice lessons. It's like piano was it. But I had a grandmother who taught me to play when I was about 4. She was a big influence in me musically, and we lived with her in Oregon for a while. So I played piano until I was about 16, and then I just stopped, and the folk music craze came along in the late 50s, and I played in high school a little bit, and was really shy and self-conscious, so I played at Hoots a bit in San Francisco and then just kind of dropped out. And then when I was about 26, 27, I met some people who lived down in Big Sur, on the coast of California, and they were playing music in their living rooms. And through a long series of events, they ended up staying at my house a few times because I had a friend who had a friend, and their car broke down, those things. And they began to have me come down there and play music with them. And I saw these people writing songs, and it just seemed like something that was a natural to try. I had this good friend, George Schroeder, who at the time was very active in those circles. And he said to me, anyone can write songs. Just sit down and sing your conversations. And George, of course, is the person who wrote The Red-Tailed Hawk, which is almost my signature song now. And he was a big, big influence. Running into him, he just got me into this whole thing and feeling like I could do it. And I started writing songs, and within 6 months, I knew I was going to be leaving San Francisco. I didn't know exactly where or how or what. I knew that my husband didn't want to be married to a musician. He told me that. So we had an amiable parting, but structured in that the kids are a real fine line for us. So I moved up to Sonoma County in my car for 6 months and became a weekend mother, which was a real interesting space in 1971. Women didn't do that very much, and really understand single fathers. You hang out on weekends in the park, and you try to find things to do, and you don't have a house. It's really, or if you're visiting from out of town, and you try to do things. But within 6 months, I had a place, and I was working at a newspaper, which I'd never done. And I did that, and I still didn't quite know what was happening, except I had this once-a-week job at this little bar, and I was playing music and writing a little bit.
This was about what time?
1971, really jumping off time. I would have been about 28, 29, right in there. And I didn't really start writing until I was about that age. I meet a lot of young mothers who say, how'd you find time to play and do all that stuff? Well, I didn't, And I'm glad I didn't. I would be embarrassed if I had stuff I'd written early. I think you have to wait till a point in your life where you have something to say, and it begins to come out. I do a song on my new record called See Here She Said, which is look at your dreams. Children grow and lovers sleep. And it's about not letting go of your dreams because you just don't know when they're going to finally come to fruit. So those years were pretty amazing. I moved up to Sonoma County, and my kids came up to live with me shortly after that. And I was involved in the schools and doing music once or twice a week, and then in this little restaurant. We did that for a couple of years, and finally just magical things began to happen. I continued to write, and the person I was living with was a mandolin player in my band, Don Coffin. We later got married. We ended up doing all kinds of community music stuff, playing for everything in the world, and I ended up being on the radio. One of the local stations asked me to do a show, and we put together an interview show for the local rock station, so I was on the rock station and the country station, and then someone in town came up to me and said, here's $4,000, make us a record, and so we made back roads for the people in our community. when I made Backroads, I didn't know if I'd ever make another record. You know, you make. But I made a record that I wanted to put out that had songs that I felt should be out there. So on that record are included Legend in His Time and Tell You Ride and Red Tail Hawk and It Ain't in the Wine. You know, songs by people that I knew that I felt should be recorded. And there I was with Owl Records. And
that was your company?
That was my company. And my model at that point was that I had grown up in Berkeley and knew Malvina Reynolds and had heard of Richard Dyer Bennett, so I knew people put out records. There weren't nearly the independent record labels there are now at that time. I called up a couple people, my distributor, and also a man named Ed Denson, who had been Country Joe and the Fish's manager, and he'd started a small record company. And because I was a disc jockey, I knew about the independent record labels, and so I called these people and asked for advice, and got a lot of advice, and put out that first record, and the next thing I knew, next year we were doing another one, which was Lines on the Paper, and then I took my first tour out of California in 1977. Once the records came out, the audiences started coming to hear the music. It was an amazing feeling. A big shift occurred where people wanted to hear my songs. It was amazing. And it just kind of made its own way. The records dragged us out of Sonoma County down into the Bay Area, and then they got airplay, and then we started traveling further and further, and finally my friend Utah Phillips sat down with me and helped me plan a tour back east, and I went back east for 2 months and played festivals and little concerts and things, and came home and went back again in 1978 and again in 1980. And by then, Safe and Anchor we'd done Safe and Anchor. It was the first studio album, and the transition in there was that my distributors had formed a record company, Kaleidoscope Records, and they'd put out David Grisman's first album. And they were looking for something else, and they had been working with me and came to me and asked if they could lease the first two and we could make another one, which was Safe and Anchor. So that took off, and I've been with them since, as a record company since 1978, so this is 7 years now, and the 3 years before that where they were distributing me. The whole progression has just been, which has excited me, is that the music has kind of made its own way. You know, the songs go from people to people. People give each other the records. The records generate more records, and it sort of keeps going like that. A lot of people say that the music is real driving music. You know, and I ride in the car sometimes, but I'm a real driver. I love traveling. I love being out in the space, and a lot of my imagery comes from that experience. It just has been kind of a progression. So all that kind of wrapped up about 1980. My life started to stabilize. I went through a divorce and then an annulment, so it was kind of a rough time. And finally just sort of settled down in Berkeley, determined to hold still, not be in any relationships. And I lived in Berkeley or actually Oakland, for a couple of years, and it was a little bit up and down, you know, as things go, and I didn't like being in the city at all. But during that time I made Close to You, and that was a collaboration with my friend Bill Griffin, who's been involved in my work for years. And then I ended up going through sort of some profound things in a lot of crises, and then finally decided just to let go and move out of Oakland and live in my car if I had to. By this time my kids were teenagers. But as happened, I ended up going with a group down to the desert in California for a vision quest, and this came out of just a series of associations where I had been sort of pointed in this direction by people, and I loved it. I loved being out there. And Terry went on the trip, my husband, and he'd been kind of following me around for a couple of years. I didn't know who he was. I just thought he was a real nice person. He got me out in the desert and was very quiet and sat me down and just started talking to me about what his feelings were, and I thought, oh, I was terrified. I didn't want to have any more relationships. I can't do this. And then I thought, well, there might be something here, you know, that you just doesn't look familiar. Maybe you should sit down and look at it. So I ended up moving back here to Marin with him, and 6 months later we got married. So that was almost 4 years ago. The healing started, you know, just kind of holding still. They say that you spend the first 35 years of your life reliving your parents' lives, and then the years between 35 and 42 you kind of shake down. So I'd say the big shakedown happened, and now it's starting to level out. You can chronicle everything I'm telling you in my songs. It's all there. So here I find myself now. I'm 43, and I have a great relationship with my kids. They're good people, and I'm in a good, stable relationship, and getting ready to go forward. I have just a real excitement feeling about this next decade. I took some time out, took a sabbatical, kind of laid back from performing. Reached a point where I didn't know if what I was singing about anymore had that much to do with my own life anymore. I needed to stop. You know, sometimes you get the point where it would be like if you had to recite the same poems all the time, you know. I needed to recharge. So I took a time off and discovered how much I really love what I do. You know, it's just you have to do that sometimes. And my audience has been super. Since I've come back, it's just been phenomenal.
Well, I'm interested in this mailing list direction. How's that developing?
Well, people have been after me for years to have a mailing list. Absolutely years. And I never had anybody to run it for me, but the record company wants to, so they're doing it. It's a new experience for me. I mean, I've always just gone on word of mouth. People just show up. But now that I have a mailing list, I think it's made a difference. People know where I am, and they really, I mean, it's really a big crowd of people that show up. But it's kind of a letter, too. I guess they send out a little information, what I'm up to, and just a list of where I'm playing. So I think it's a good direction. I think it's a wonderful thing.
I'm a little more interested in your musical influences.
Boy, people ask me that. I have to say that it probably started with the Weavers and went into Rosemary Clooney. And I started out with singers that you could hear the words. I mean, that's been the big influence. And then I got into writers. Dylan is a big influence, and of course the Beatles happened, and folk music was always kind of there in the background. I got interested in folk music out of the Kingston Trio stuff, you know, and the Weavers. I wanted to know more about it. Once I got interested in folk music and started going to libraries, I started finding out about country music. Then I discovered the Carter family, and then when I got into country music radio, by then I was starting to discover, you know, Merle Haggard and Lefty Frizzell and, you know, people like that. So, and I used to listen to Hank Williams as a kid. So it's kind of been a progression through sort of honest songs and honest singers, you know, that kind of clarity. I love Buffy St. Marie's work. I love listening to people like Stevie Winwood. You know, just, I guess it's that heart that's there.
Poets?
Oh, poets that I read? Well, I always liked, I never wrote poetry as a kid or anything, but I used to read Whitman, and then I got into Garcia Lorca when I was in my Spanish period. I read contemporary poetry. If it's the poem that gets me, I'm into imagery. See, I'm really a frustrated painter, so it really isn't so much a question of whose work is his, what kind of pictures it paints and what kind of things it says. If you looked at my bookshelf, you'd probably find things. I like Gary Snyder's work. I like Robert Bly's work. Alice Walker. And those are all pretty contemporary. Looking back over the years, like I said, there was this sort of numb period when I wasn't really doing much, except making dinner parties and sewing clothes and baking bread. So I can't remember really a lot about poetry. At that time, I was listening mostly to the 60s radio, which was just filled with poets. Everybody and their brother, practically. So. But as far as writing goes, you know, the structure of how I write, I never thought about it being poetry too much. I just sort of followed the models of the folk and country stuff, but I write a lot from visual imagery. It always comes down to visual images, pretty much.
In a way, I'm confused whether you're a folk singer or a country
You're
singer.
not alone. It's my Gemini nature. I write a lot of fences. There's the folk, there's the country, there's the bluegrass, and they're all sort of intertwined. And then there's the classical, which is what I grew up with. So there's a classical twist to my melodies, you know, the structure of the song sometimes. I never learned to play rock and roll. I'd love to know how, but I never learned to play it, so I don't write in that idiom. You know, I think if I started playing it, I'd probably write more in that idiom. But it just sort of weaves in between the cracks there, I think.
Mm-hmm. Can you characterize modern country?
Modern country music seems to have lost its focus. Unless, of course, you get into people like Rodney Crowell, who are just, I mean, that's a fine songwriter. And to me, he epitomizes what's really great about modern country music. James Talley's another one. There's a lot of good Texas songwriters. But a lot of the stuff that's on the radio seems to be from a formula point of view, and it's slick and it's arranged, and the words don't say anything. What always made country music strong, I think, was that that it had stories and feelings in it. And when it loses that thread and it starts to try to go crossover into what they think of as pop music, then it has lost a lot of soul. So I don't listen a lot to modern country music, unless it's Merle Haggard or someone who's writing, still there, still doing stuff, who's picking songs carefully. Once in a while, Don Williams will come out with a song. I don't know if you ever heard a song called "What'll They Do with Good Old Boys Like Me." Oh, I heard that one. I had to stop that car and listen to that one. That's a great song. Bobby Bare's early work was wonderful. I think that the country music audience is one of the most loyal in the world, and I think they're ready for the shift back. I think that there's a chance. I mean, and I don't say that just for me, but I just feel from my appetites and my demographics, I mean, and the people around me, my age, that if country music got a little more toward the folk, if it got a little more back toward simplicity and stories and good lyrics, that it would just have this whole rejuvenation. I think it's still there. It has too much history. Country music has duration. I used to say that when I was younger, that to be an artist in country music is to be able to age in your work. Mm-hmm. To be an artist in the rock and roll world is not quite so easy. I've always integrated my family and my life into my work. It's always very visible, more so than ever. I just think it's important for people to know that musicians have lives and that your work comes out of your life. When I admire an artist's work, I have to know something about the artist. I want to know that their life is reflected in their work, or vice versa, that there is no separation in a way. That if they have integrity and heart, that it goes clear across the board, that when they go home from playing the music, they don't turn into somebody completely different. So for me, that's a real important thing, and that's what I love about country music. And the way it's packaged these days in this sort of slick manner, you just don't know sometimes. It's just my preference. Mm-hmm. That's why we're sitting here and I'm barefooted,
Does it ever become a problem to have your audience so close to your life?
It becomes a problem when, it's becoming a problem now more than it used to, because I didn't used to be so widely known. I don't mind being personal. The stage is a very free place for me. I can be anything I want to be. If I have to get up there and pretend to be somebody I'm not, I feel really uneasy. So just to be myself is the greatest freedom. But what's happening is that because I've been so accessible, I come out and talk to my audience in between the shows, and people write to me. I can't keep up with that anymore. There's too much of it. And I've always really tried to respond personally to things. But I'm finding that it's just taking too much energy out of me. Not that I feel any less, just that to have time to create and time to live my own life and time to perform on the level that's starting to happen, I'm going to have to start cutting back on responding, which is difficult for me to let go of. I mean, I used to listen to tapes. A lot of people would send me music. Now I just don't have the time anymore. Someone needs to be listening, And I remember being a younger artist and wanting people to listen to my songs and feeling just dismayed that I never got any response, So I'm thinking I'm going to have to start trying to put together some middle support system where I have someone helping me who can help me screen so that I can respond. They can put the letters together. Something in between that. And also being able to have time to write. When the quiet is the most single important element of what do you need for songwriting. For me, I have to go out and live. I have to be outside. I have to be in situations, but then I have to come back and recapitulate them, and I don't always get that time to do that part of it. So that's been the biggest thing I've noticed from that. But I love having a personal relationship with my audiences. I hope that never changes.
I wanted to talk about your music in terms of something that the people in your audience will sing with you. I noticed that there's a real willingness to do that.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. And I used to just have certain songs that I would have them sing along on, but then I started doing some solo work recently. When you don't have a band with you or anybody, the audience becomes even more important in terms of functioning. And so I would just have them sing along on anything they knew. And the next thing I knew, I had harmonies on Eyes of a Painter. And I mean, people know those songs, and little kids come and sit in the front row and they know all the words. There was a little boy in San Francisco last night, or night before last, that said, I liked the concert. He stayed up for the whole thing. I don't know if you saw me talking. He was only about this big. He'd been at Marine World all day and come to the concert and stayed awake for the whole thing. I couldn't believe it. He said, I really like the one about the old houses. That was my new song, Carolina Pines. I couldn't believe it. I was amazed. I thought, boy, children's capacity for imagery, so underestimated, because I've never liked kids' records per se. There are a few successful ones, but there are a lot of kids coming to the concerts with their parents now. I'm getting second generation Kate Wolfies. It's great. They know all the words and they sit there and sing. And what really excites me is how many families will come up. I mean, the dad, the mom, and the little kids, and they'll all say, "We sing 'Give Yourself to Love' at home," and they all know all the words. And it's just such a. I mean, that just warms your heart. I mean, what could you ask for? But yeah, I love it when the audience sings.
Audiences were packed, and they were all listening with strict attention. I mean, they were either listening or they were singing along with the songs.
Yeah, they're very, very involved. I'm really spoiled. That's why I love bringing people in on my audiences that I feel that would really enjoy the experience, like Margaret Roadknife from Australia.
I'm going to see the Mad Max movie tonight. So I'll have to look for
Watch for her, yeah. Yeah, I love my audiences. They are really special. I have a lot of bar owners and club owners who say, "Boy, it's never been so quiet in here." The waitresses will come up and thank me, like that. But somebody said something to me about one of those concerts. They said, I had a good time. I laughed, and it was spiritual, and I felt so much. And for me, that's what I feel. When those moments happen, is that we all go into these little places together. It's a real healing for me. And I think all of us who are in that together. But I don't call it that. There's a lot of different things. I've done concerts where I've been asked to fill in for a band that didn't show up, or we ended up in a picnic grounds doing just country music, but we had a great time. And there's always a few people who know we are. It doesn't matter, it's you go in there with that feeling in yourself. And I've always felt that what the audience, if you're relaxed and really there, the audience is there too. And at least that's been my experience.
Well, who is your audience?
Well, gosh, I mean, you've seen a real cross-section. I had my mind blown Thursday night. I don't know if you noticed how many older people, gray hairs. I mean, they hadn't seen me in years. I used to be a real local fixture up there, and the loyalty and the connection and the memories, But my audience seems to be like the music. You can't quite put it in any category. It's across a lot of ages. It cuts across a lot of generations. I have older women come to see me in some obscure place who say, "My daughter lives in California and said I had to come and see you, and she sent me your records and I love them." Or someone will say to me, "Your music is the only one my mother and I can listen to together." So it seems to be mixed ages. It seems to be more white collar than blue collar, near as I can tell. Or if it's younger kids, they're in transition. I do get some bikers and stuff, it's kind of neat. A lot of kids in middle ground, more and more teenagers, which I find exciting, and I don't think that's just me. I think that the kids are getting ready for something again, and they're starting to look into folk music. I think that's a real exciting thing that's happening. I think that a large percentage of my audiences are really words people. They really are into the lyrics and what the lyrics are saying. I'm not really musician in the sense that Nina Gerber is, for instance. I think she's a great compliment because she's so musical that she fills in that whole side of things, I mean, I have my melodies, but mainly I'm a words person. And that's the kind of music I listen to, is words music. I tend to also, somewhat like a chameleon, if I'll play somewhere where, say, I'm out in a rural area where there's more farmers and cowboys, I'll do a little more country music, which is a little more on the emotional side. Or my story songs like Eyes of a Painter. But trying to find some common ground. I have a fan from Africa, and it's so funny. I met him in Austin, Texas, and I didn't know who he was. He was standing there, and finally he said, "I'm from Africa." I said, he says, "Yeah, so we listen to Bob Dylan down there and all these things." He says, "And we love your music." I was amazed. So I sent him some tapes to send home to Africa, and he sent some back, and his mother, who doesn't speak a word of English and lives in this village in Africa, sent me back a hand-dyed piece of blue indigo. It was just stunning, especially since I had just written the song with deep blue indigo in the lyrics, and I hadn't any idea when I wrote that why I picked that particular phrase. It's a lot of things like that. I get airplay in Ireland and Scotland and Belgium, British Isles, and English-speaking countries for a while, and actually still do get airplay in Japan and Australia. So it's hard to say exactly. Sometimes I think it's my voice, but mostly it's the lyrics. when I started singing early on, in the early 60s, and dropped out, people compared me to Joan Baez, and I just didn't want to be compared to Joan Baez. I just didn't feel there was, I mean, her voice is beautiful, but I was more interested in the lyrics and what songs were going to be sang. And so when I began writing, it kind of gave me my own channel, even though my voice gets sometimes described as a cross between Joni Mitchell and Judy Collins and that kind of thing. There's an edge on it, I think, that just keeps it sort of in its own category. Public radio is really keeping it alive. But it used to be that I thought my audiences were more in the outlying areas, in more country settings, but that's changing now. That seems to be things changing some. I think the visual thing is just what is the common thread. Whoever really is into the lyric and what the lyric is saying. I never have thought about a lot. What do I do to make this happen? Because I heard this great story that really influenced me early on. This poet named Rick Maston was giving a lecture, and it was just when I was starting to think about doing the music, and I moved up to Sonoma County. He told this story about two artists who'd been friends for years and years, and they'd been trying to be successful, and finally one got this huge show in New York, and his pal went to see it, and he walked into this gallery, and here was the guy's works all over the wall, and all these people drooling over it and buying pieces and everything, and he said to him, "This is fantastic. How do you get your work shown like this?" And his friend looked at him and said, "You don't worry about it. You put yourself into your work, and your work makes friends, and your friends get it shown, you know." And that's been my philosophy. It always will be, you know. Put yourself into your work, and the work speaks for itself, and then it does what it's going to do. So I've never been really good at promotion, and I don't have a promotional package or any of that stuff, you know. Now that I've reached a level where there's a sort of history of what I'm doing, I feel more comfortable if somebody came along and did publicity. But in the beginning, before anybody knew much about me or anything, I didn't feel comfortable with it at all. I wanted there to be something to speak for itself. That's why in my promotional packages, I usually just use press clippings. I never really have written much about myself.
You've been touring a lot recently, haven't
Oh
you?
boy, I sure have. I went back to work last September, and I had stayed on the West Coast for 1980, 81, 82, 83, 84. I took off, and in January I got a booking agent, which is the first time in these 13 years I've had anybody working with me, except for secretaries once in a while. And all of a sudden, I just find myself able to go just about anywhere, and there's so many places that people want me to come because the records have been out there. It's hard to do everything, you know, and yet it's wonderful. It's just a wonderful feeling. I love getting back in touch and traveling and seeing different areas of the country. I've never been down in the Northeast, for instance. I mean the Southeast, you know, down around the Carolinas. I'll be in Florida in October. Never been there. You know, it's like going somewhere and discovering these little pockets of people who know you and know your music and are glad you're there and want to show you something of their lives in the country. You know, it's really exciting. And then I balance that against my family, which they love me and they love what I do, but they sure love having me home. So, yeah, I've been touring a lot more.
You finding full houses across
Yeah.
the country?
Yeah. Let's see, I had one the other day that wasn't so full. What was it? I was in Victoria, British Columbia, which is not a place that I'm really well known, and the person who put the concert on didn't know the community very well, but we had a small choice audience, but that's all right, you know. I mean, I used to say that to Nina when she was first playing with me. I said, there's never a throwaway gig. There's always one person in the audience who's going to be there to really hear you. So that's my philosophy about that. I never worry about it. Mostly I feel for the promoters or the group that's putting on the concert if something happens, but I'm just myself, you know, as much as I can be, and there are always reasons you get in those little funny situations, or you have an opportunity to do something a little differently because it is real low-key. It puts you right up against some things. You don't have to do a really high-powered thing. You can be different.
And all this touring affects your songwriting, though.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it does. I can really see how artists, when they become successful, put out lame records. Because you reach a point where, you know, you have no time to really think about stuff. And I mean, even the record I just did, I had to do it in between tours, and I would have loved to have gone back and re-recorded some of the tracks that I felt just needed a little different pacing maybe or something, but it isn't possible. So it's going to be like a photograph. Nothing's perfect, you know, but I can find myself now, as I'm becoming busier, that it's real important to take time to write, because I have a lot of ideas, but I don't want to just put out anything. Just start putting stuff out. Fortunately, I work with a record company, and they'll call me up and they say, we really want you to make a record in January. They want me to do a Christmas album. And we want you to make one in August. And I'm going, and my agent's calling up and saying, okay, you can take July, you can take January and August off, but you have to do that tour in February up in the Northwest. I'm going, and then my family's, hear it. So it is a balancing act. I'm finding that recently there's realization that I really have to start spending much more time with music than I have been in recent years, because I've managed to do a lot of other stuff too. But now that I'm becoming more public and more widely recognized, it's almost like I really have to put in more time with my music, because there is less time to do it. I don't know if that makes sense, but more of the time than I would have. But yeah, I can see how it's easy to get out of touch.
Is there something special about California music?
Well, it's special like other places are special. I don't think it's more special, but I definitely think there's a kind of influence, Northern California influence. Actually, it kind of goes up into Oregon too. There's that, there's kind of an easygoingness and a certain way of approaching lyric, as opposed to maybe the Texas songwriting school or whatever. I find it's more narrative and longer, not necessarily good type songwriting, but more visual, maybe more pictures. I don't know how to put it, because I can usually spot somebody who's from out here. A lot of it has to do with California being a state of mind. The coasts tend to be the places where things start and then they move inland. So a lot of the things that are talked about in the songs maybe are a little more direct. My friend Utah Phillips and I used to talk about what would happen when I toured. He said, you're going to find that California audiences, and this was a generalization, but this man's toured for years, and I respect his opinion. Western audiences demand intimacy. Well, Eastern audiences aren't comfortable with it. And Midwest audiences want technical proficiency. It has to do with just a certain outlook. Well, that's not necessarily, that's a generalization. I think that there's sort of a new age movement that's infiltrating the coast now, so things are evening up some. But when you look at our history and the way that our society is, it's true. People came west, there were more of the Mavericks, and the East Coast is more conservative and older history. And the Midwest is just different too. So what happened was I didn't end up changing. I went on tour, and it was a different response in some places, but there were people who connected with the music everywhere, and so I have these little knots of people. But I'm finding now, this has been a really different year, that in touring, there seems to be much more across the board that people just are hungry for directness and connection. And these times, I think this kind of music fits in really well in these times. And it doesn't really have too much to do with geography like it did anymore. It's changed. Things are changing.
When does your music most affect you?
My music most affects me when I feel it connect to the way I'm feeling or what's happening in my life at a given time, and I can sing it in a way that connects with other people. When I was writing Brother Warrior, I was sitting in this room writing Brother Warrior, and I started crying. I was so affected by the person I was writing this for and the image of his work in the world, and just the overview of all of us who are trying to do what we do. That it affected me really deeply, and that doesn't happen to me very often. I can't think of very many times when I've written a song that made me react. And sometimes I'll write a song and I get a really excited feeling, like I know when I'm singing it for people that there's going to be a very happy time, or there's going to be a really special time when everyone's singing it. That's a really great feeling. Like Give Yourself to Love was that way. So I guess it affects me most. And the bottom line is connectedness. When it feels like it's right and true, and it's going to connect in a good way. But nights like last night or night before last at the music hall, when the sound was right, the audience was right, we were feeling great. Those are the high points. That's just one of those little shooting stars that you remember. When you're working in a place where you've got a musician working with you who's not tuned into the music, the sound man doesn't get it, and you have an audience out there that's waiting, and they're just so happy and wonderful that you're there. Like Katati was like that. You transcend those things, and you hope that it got through for them. You know, you hope that enough of you got past the difficulties you were going through that you didn't have to take it to the audience, and the audience had a good time. But I learned something on my vision quest. I wrote the Medicine Wheel song on my vision quest, and I wrote Desert Wind. I was perfectly content to sit under this rock for 3 days, all by myself, watching the sky and the moon and the stars and spiders and lizards and things. On the third day, I wrote Desert Wind. As soon as that song came through, I was discontented. I wanted to sing it for someone. I wanted to make the circle complete. I wanted to sit down and just let the song go out from me. And it wasn't enough just to write it for myself. So I learned that was when I really got this realization that the work I do is really more important than I sometimes give it credit for, that it's a big part of my life, that it's absolutely essential, that I'm most whole when I am participating in that circle.
Giving the music
and to an audience and having the audience connect and give me, we give each other a lot, the common ground of our lives, the common ground of our emotions. And we're mirrors to each other. I needed to look in the mirror. A lot of times when I write, I won't know really until I perform it if a song is true and connecting, because I can feel it on my level. Not till I try it out do you know if the language is working, or if I'll get feedback from people. For instance, the song The Red-Tailed Hawk, which a friend of mine wrote, has got this line in it, there's just some things that need a man's hand, which I've always been very comfortable with. But I've gotten increasingly a lot of letters from women who have been working farms with other women for years, and very nicely, put, just, this isn't, it's hard for us to sit there and listen to that because we don't feel that way. So sometimes I'll change things, To neighbor, yeah, because and people, and I've had so much interesting feedback about that. I mean, men come up and say, I really like the old way better. And I say, well, the original line was, there's just some things that need a woman's hand. And I put that in the record so it would be there. Most of my songs are written specifically that either sex can sing. Or you can change the lyric enough to change it. Like, if you look at the lyrics, I don't know why, I think it says, you're not the sweetest one I ever knew.
How is an artist different from another person?
How is an artist different from another person? You never have any time off. You spend a lot of time observing, seeing, thinking about things. It's your full life. It's not like you just go do a job. I have worked straight jobs, and I come home and I leave that there. I balk a little bit because I think all of us have artistry in us, but I think to live a creative life, to live a life where creativity is the source, you have to pay attention every waking and dreaming moment of your life. And it tends to affect everything. It affects your relationships. It affects your sense of yourself. I think you live on an edge, and I think that's why a lot of artists struggle with addictions, because you are so finely tuned all the time that sometimes you need something to bring you down to the ground. I mean, I tend to eat when I have to bring myself down. I don't, I just, everybody has something, just that they have to use. It's quite a ride, I think. It's like living with your eyes and ears, your senses wide open all the time, and that's why quiet is so important, and that's why it does affect your relationships. Sometimes you just need to go off by yourself, or to ground yourself out in ways that aren't always constructive. Once you get into the flow, where you're in relationship to the world and people around you and yourself in a proper way, I think it's really wonderful. It's really nourishing. It's an exciting way to be alive. But that's what you learn. It takes a while.
Do you hear music at odd times?
Mm-hmm. I hear lyrics at odd times, and I usually carry a pencil and paper with me, but sometimes I'll edit myself right out of taking it seriously. I'll be somewhere and this line will come to me and I'll think, oh, a great line, and I'll think, I should find a piece of paper. Oh, that's not such a great line. Then I'll think of that again some other way. But what I'm missing out on is that if I had taken that line, go set and had gone outside or something and just played with a free association of it, there was probably a lot more going on in my mind than I had given it credit for. Yeah.
So songwriting is all the time for you?
Yeah, I know that there's more about my craft I could learn so that I could sit down and say I could come in. And the way my life is, I'm starting to have to really work at it that way because I don't have the freedom anymore to be quite so all the time with it. Is to take the observations and note them, but to schedule a time to work. That I need to learn more about the actual craft so that I can sit down and put it into a structure. And that's just a part of the process. It doesn't mean I'm losing anything, but more that I've reached a point where I have to organize myself better. So that's my next task.
From the song Looking Back at You, there are two lines I was interested. I never wrote a song for you that touched me like you do. How is art important? Is it important? You know, when you look at the actual relationships compared to writing about the relationships.
In other words, hands-on as opposed to talking or writing about it. I think that it's important to have the beauty around the actual act of living. In that line, that touched me like you do, I was talking more about being touched inside. Although it came out the other way too, which is okay. There's a lot of times those things come out when you write and you don't know they're going to happen, and then you have both meanings. There's something about the expansiveness of creative writing. I don't know. You can. I don't know how to put this. It's not quite so dry. You can do something in a song. I started writing and singing because I was real uncomfortable talking in front of people, for instance. It's easier for me to sing than it is to talk, although it used to be. Now I talk a lot. And to write to this person, I had a hard time expressing myself in a daily sense, being direct. But when I finally sat down to write this song, I was able to say what I couldn't say in an everyday sense that he would hear. And so in that sense, I think art is very important. I think that people hang pictures and write songs and listen to music because it expands their capacity to express themselves. Whether or not you create it yourself or not, if you use that to expand that expression. That's why I have colors around me and things on the walls and and things like that.
And your songs help expand other people's expression.
I've heard people say that. People say to me, "Boy, you say just what I would say if I could figure out how to say it that way."
Mm-hmm.
And I've had that feeling about other people's work too, which is why sometimes I do other people's songs. But Woody Guthrie has a great quote about that. He says, "Let me be known as the person who told you what you already knew." Sometimes we just can't find the words, but we all have those same feelings. Yeah, some people, like you feel those things and you don't feel like it's okay to say them, or you can't quite get the words, and then it comes and it's just this breaking loose. You have a way to say it, and I can remember that, when I used to learn more of other people's songs, that I could say things that I wouldn't have the courage or the organization of myself to say or to bring to words. So I think the creative arts are very important that way. You've had experience when you see a painting, you walk into a room and there's this color and this explosion of image, and you just go, something inside of you just goes, oh, I love, it's just like it expresses something in yourself that your eyes can't verbalize. So I think the arts are very important for that.
So what gets in the way of love?
What gets in the way of love? A lot of things get in the way of love. Trust, lack of trust, lack of forgiveness, expectations, fear. Fear gets in the way of love, probably overall more than anything. Lack of time is wrapped up in other things, but being afraid of being too close, being afraid of saying what you really feel, being afraid of loving someone that is going to love you in a right way. Being afraid of looking at what you really need and taking the risk to do it, of knowing yourself. I mean, it all comes back, I think, to going inside and really learning who you are and what you need and how you can love and how you can be loved. We all grow up being afraid we're not really loved. And all of us to varying degrees, depending on our situations, take shorter or longer times to get through that one. When you find someone that loves you, sometimes you project onto them that you think they love you in a certain way when they in fact love you in another way. So you have to weed all that out. It's just a journey. And what gives love its most beautiful quality is the other side of it too. It's a polarity. I really think that the blissed out state of love can get pretty boring. It's like too much sugar. You have to have the dynamics of it, so that it has its ups and downs and highs and lows. But I think that what gets in the way of love is just maybe not loving yourself first of all. Once you can love yourself and love other people from that, or know that other people love you, and loving the world, to me, the nature is so healing, because you realize how much love there is in nature and how much everything else. You can go out and observe it, and it all kind of ties together.
How do you survive unfulfilled love?
How do you survive unfulfilled love? You take time, and it's funny. I think for me, surviving unfulfilled love, you look for the gifts in what you do have from it. You're talking about a specific situation, or a feeling of wanting to be loved?
Could be either,
yeah.
Actually.
Some people,
Some people go through life feeling unfulfilled.
Never having loved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To survive that almost implies just to sort of grit your teeth and say, well, it's never going to happen to me, therefore I'm just going to do something else. I don't think you have to do that. I think if you're wanting to be loved, sometimes you just have to relax and not think about it, and it comes. But one of the things that for me has really been true is you get in a point where nothing's working, and you finally just let go and try something completely different. Something will come along, and just go into experiencing your life, and you will run into the other emotions as well. Whether it's changing jobs or taking a cruise. There's a line in the I Ching, though, that it kind of always struck me about love, and it isn't really about love, but it's about a lot of things. It says, to rule is to serve. And I have found that when you give yourself away, you get what you need. That if you try to take in, it doesn't work. But if you're feeling stuck and feeling unfulfilled, to give your love away is like the mirror we were talking about. It creates a circle, and it comes back to you. Maybe in ways you didn't believe it would, or maybe in ways that don't look right at first, or aren't what you had in mind. But if you just open yourself up and realize what's there, a lot of times more there is there than you ever thought would be. That's been my experience, is that if you're thinking you're unfulfilled, it's just a time of being stuck. That there's really a lot there. It's just because of circumstances and situations. Instead of giving away, you're trying to take in, when you, in fact, are full, and you need to let some of it out. It's not a real graceful way to say it, but I think that that's really true. If you look especially at people who live long lives, how they love, and how they give away love, and how they give away compassion and caring, and they never ask themselves, what's coming to me? And they probably did when they were younger. The best lovers are the ones that had to learn the hard way. Is my feeling about that.
So love, I hear it as especially expressed in your songs, I hear it as a teacher, as a guide, as a thing between people, a relationship, something to give to strangers. How can this one thing envelop all these different things, all these different directions?
You're asking me a question that I think they've asked for centuries. But I think love comes down to connectedness and relationship, and anything that is alive is connected in that way. So it does cross the boards. It goes into strangers, and you give it in varying degrees. You have to be careful of people's capacity to absorb and the relationship you create. But compassion and caring and appreciation for a person wherever they are all forms of love, and they do cut across all the boards. So can apply. I mean, it's just the bottom line. It's an ease. It's a way of of just feeling connected and related to every living thing in this world. That isn't to say, I mean, I've experienced violence in my life, and I know what it's like to look at someone like that, and you're not going to stand there and say, I love you. Although, on some level, for me, certainly, I stood outside the situation and just realized this has nothing to do with me. It doesn't make it hurt any less. But you can keep your love to yourself in the sense that in a situation like that, you can realize that time will take care of a lot of things, and that you need to keep yourself as whole as you can, and realize that you do love and are loved. And sometimes situations come in that it's not the time to be in them. Those people or the situation is not ready, and you just get away from it. But in time, they will reach whatever point they're going to reach on that realization about love. That's why I say you can't go around really blissed out and thinking, Life has its realities, and so does nature. I mean, you look at animals and how they are by themselves and how they are with their own kind, and then when danger threatens, how they are. Doesn't make them any less loving. They're still unease about them, and they're with their own, when they know the situation's right. But I don't know, for me, when I stand up on the stage and I look out at this audience of disparate people, and I know there's every conceivable kind of person in that audience, because I've certainly been close to a lot of different things in my life. I know that standing where I am with the experience in my life and the lessons that I've learned and I'm learning, if I just radiate from where I am with that, everyone in the room is going to resonate from the point they are, and will have that point of connection. Whether it's people who are being violent with each other, who really would love to love each other, or whatever it is, it reinforces that little kernel for all of us. I don't know. I wouldn't attempt to define love any more than anybody else in this world has, but it really is the bottom line.
In the same respect, it's the most confusing thing.
It's the most confusing thing. It's a process. It doesn't have a definition. I mean, it has all these things to it. It's a teacher. It's a healer. It's somebody will put you through the paces. But it's always with good intention in the bottom line there, Well, I guess it was that the Beatles song, All You Need Is Love. And I don't think that that's too optimistic. I just think that you can be angry in love too. I mean, it's the bottom line that goes underneath everything. And if you realize that you're dealing with something that you don't like or is not comfortable, but that your goal is to get into a peaceful place with it, then that's the sort of the grease on the wheel. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to go over the rocks in the road. I don't know. I still feel like I'm learning about love. I couldn't really give you a big definition about it. When I write about it, it usually has to do with some dynamic of a situation where it just sort of comes out. If we didn't have it, it's so tied in with everything else, hope and excitement about life and things. I mean, what if it weren't there? It's almost like the thing you could define more by what if it weren't there than, what do you, if it's there, what do you have? If it weren't there, it'd be like spending a lot of time with a paper bag or something, It wouldn't be anything going on. Look over at the chair and your wife is a paper bag and your kid is a paper bag and your dog is a paper bag. The love isn't there, so more by taking it away can you see what it is than by trying to define what's there. It's aliveness.
Are you connected with any kind of New Age feeling?
I think there's something going on in terms of people kind of coming out of the 70s and getting ready for coming together again. I don't know if I think because my process is probably in the same place, I'm connected in that sense. My lyrics and what I'm writing about come out of more my spiritual evolution now than so much my struggles, although the struggles are always there. I've learned a lot from knowing older people that way, that, things come in cycles. And so at this time right now, I think for me and a lot of people I know, there seems to be a hopefulness and a pulling together and people coming back out of the woods in a lot of ways and getting ready to just join together and experience joy together and the sense of being alive in society and everything. So I feel like I'm very much a part of my time. Very definitely. As a matter of fact, I speculate sometimes what it would be like if you were to look back and see where the zenith was. Because I just feel like I'm on this process. It just keeps going sort of over there, over there, over there, and I hope I never stop being alive that way or connected to my time. But I definitely feel like I'm part of whatever's going on right now. I think for me, I feel a groundswelling of just wonderful energy, really good energy, but a little more grounded in reality than, say, the 60s were.
But in the same respect, you seem to be connecting into an old way.
I am feeling really connected with the old ways. I grew up a small child, as I said, in Michigan, and I was very much into Indian connectedness to the earth. I was fascinated by it, but at that time, I had nothing around me to really explain that. For me, it's probably just an old part of me that is in all of us. I am most happy when I am most connected to the natural world. And the Indian spirituality, which is connected to a sense of a creator and the rightness of relationship in all living things, to me is the most important work ahead of us. I mean, it's come down to that now where we have the capacity to destroy this whole planet. And for me, the most comfortable way to work with that is to work on reestablishing connectedness and to write about it and to talk about it, because it's something we can all tap into. Doesn't matter what language we speak or anything. And those of us who live in high-rise apartments or condominiums and don't have any garden space, don't have any feel for the earth anymore, who've maybe for a couple of generations lost touch with cycles, lose touch with our own cycles. You know, you don't see very far ahead. You see from paycheck to paycheck, or, you know, how come I'm not happy? But there's such a nourishment in the natural world, and it's so important to keep it together. So that's increasingly made me turn back toward that avenue of experiencing that. I don't think there's anything magical in the Indianness, in the sense that the Indian society has been so affected by our world, as everything has. But there are pockets of Indian people practicing this who've never lost touch with that, and so it's an accessible route. You know, for me, again, I feel there's just something really old in me that's real comfortable with it. It's probably always been there, and I try to step lightly. I don't want to run around feeling like I'm posturing. You know, it's like the guru movement of the 60s. You know, everybody wanted to go to India and study with a guru. Well, everybody wants to go to the reservation and study with a medicine man, you know, when in fact we have our own selves, our own medicine inside us. And it's important to be true to yourself. Whatever amalgam you were put in it on this earth in, it's important to take that and use it. Don't go running off. Just, sure, you know, consult with teachers, but trust your own instincts. Start experiencing yourself. I've never been much of a joiner, and I've gone to a few workshops and gone here and there, but I always end up back on my own little path again, you know, weaving in among all these people, and there's always reasons, but it comes right back down to realizing we all have these resources inside us, and that we all grew up as little kids being fascinated by the green and growing things and the crawling things, and you watch all that, you learn enormous amounts about yourself. And you love your neighbors, you love people, you love life. And so that's the glue that's going to hold this world together. So that's why I'm increasingly more drawn to it. It's a necessary process for me too. As it happens, what it's doing is, by writing all these things, is putting me in touch with more Native American peoples, which is all right. You know, they're feeling connected to the music too, which is very exciting to me. But there's a wonderful quote from Buffy Sainte-Marie that I will use sometime on an album cover, I think. It says, "You think I have visions because I'm an Indian, but I have visions because there are visions to be seen." And I think that's just important to keep in mind. The Indian peoples that I have been in touch with peripherally, not my close friends, but some that I've seen, have always been angry. The white man is trying to take the red man's road. But we're all trying to take the green road, you know, as far as I'm concerned. And it's simply a matter of everybody learning to trust that that's the common ground. And if we need to get information from the Native Americans who have stayed more in touch with that, then that's what we need to do. And if they need to understand us a little better, that's what will happen. But there's a middle ground. I'm a great one for middle grounds.
Is there anything you especially live for or by? in your life?
Anything I especially live for or by? Well, I would say that I live for a sense of a feeling of purposefulness in this world. That my life is, I could stop my life at any point and feel that my life has been worthwhile, and that the people I've loved and my children have all reached a point where their lives are now going to come to fruit. I feel that that's real important. And then as far as something that I live by, it's just try to be as alive as possible, and feel free to make my mistakes, and try to be as honest as I can with myself, which is always a process. Beyond that, it kind of all blurs together. You get up in the morning and you feel like life is something that needs to be taken care of. You live it. I don't know. It's increasingly become true that I'm trying to be as consistent as I can in every aspect of my life, so that everything relates to everything else. And that's a very exciting feeling. We talked about that earlier, about being on stage and being one person and getting off and being somebody else, and how the people I admire most are people whose lives are reflected in their work, and their work is reflected in their lives. There is no separation. To be a person of integrity and consciousness and love, and be aware of your limitations and not try to be what other people think you should be, but try to grow and be open to that. So I don't know. I guess it sounds very New Agey.